I think in a lot of businesses, to connect with what we're actually building as opposed to just building a better balance sheet is, I think, part of the answer of why it's important to us that everybody prospers and that our department doesn't win at the expense of their department, because you had a clear vision of what you're building more than profit.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And this is the final week of our birthday giveaway, because this episode will air on the 31st, which means if we were in that day, tomorrow would be our shared birthday.
Yes, it would. Very exciting.
So this is your last chance to get in on the drawing in this last week in honor of our birthday, because this drawing will be happening the week of our birthday. This week's drawing, not only will you get the Starbucks gift card, which I still have to send out to everybody who has won thus far, but we will also be giving away one of our coveted So Here's My Story whiskey glasses.
Ooh.
So possibly a set. I don't know. I haven't decided. It depends on how the shipping works.
and let me just ask you this. You keep saying our shared birthday. Were we born in the same year, Jody?
Why, Elliot, no, we were not. We were born exactly 10 years apart. So.
And who's the younger one?
Well, that would be me. I am the younger one.
Right.
Okay. I will be 48. So this week's winner is Carol Keese. So yay, Carol. We will be getting that Starbucks gift card out to you. And anyone who joins the Facebook group or joins the text platform at 410-632-6894, links for which, both texting and the Facebook group, you can find on our website at sohere'smystory.com. You will be in the drawing for the last Starbucks gift card, not like the last on the planet, but the last for this, and one or two, as yet undecided, of our whiskey glasses.
So here's my story. And it arises out of what I understand to be the very serious business of creating games. If you've ever been associated with that world or know somebody who's really tried to create a game, and more importantly, create a game that becomes the next big thing, it takes a lot of work. It takes connections and luck and a lot of work, like many businesses out there. And I was particularly struck by a story I read about this woman who created a game called Wingspan. And what she really liked, first of all, she liked engine games. Engine games are like, if you're familiar with Settlers of Catan or something like that, they're called engine games because each person tries to create something, whether it's a settlement or a setup or whatever. And the more successful you are at creating your settlement, I'll call it, the easier it is to make more progress. It's like building your own engine. So that's why it's called an engine game. But she was particularly interested in building something that would appeal to more women. So it didn't have sieges and castles and military. And this was her take on this. She wanted something that was less militaristic. And through a lot of trial and error and working with her group, she came up with this game called Wingspan. And in Wingspan, each person, and I'm sure I'm going to get this description wrong, but it's close. Each person builds kind of their habitat, but it's based on birds. And so you have very factual depictions of birds, what they eat, where they nest, the number of eggs they have, the threats to these birds. So you build your own kind of habitat. But the thing about Wingspan, and this was the point, that she found really appealed to just as many women as men, where normally it's skewed towards men, is that my success in building my habitat could also help you. It wasn't that either we're in silos, so my success puts me farther ahead than you, or my success actually makes it more difficult for you to succeed because I can block you in whatever you want to do. But there are choices apparently in advancing this game, or in advancing in this game, that I could choose to the move that would also benefit everybody else playing the game, or I could choose just what benefits me and move ahead. And so they had done thousands of simulations in order to see if we're going to invest in this and make it nationwide and all that stuff. And more people, and it wasn't, they didn't say just more women did this or more men did this, but more and more people would make that choice to just advance the game for everybody, as opposed to just move farther ahead. So what she did was she created a game that was by definition adversarial, because there was going to be a winner and a loser.
Right.
But
ultimately you do want to win. But she found that a lot more people were just interested in continuing with the game than reaching the final conclusion as to who won. That's really interesting.
I found it interesting for a couple reasons. One was I found it interesting that from this article anyway, and from the interviews, she was drawing a gender line, that this would appeal to women more than men, and making the assumption that men would be more adversarial in this and just interested in, starving the opposition or overrunning them militarily or doing.
I think it's interesting that she thought women wouldn't be interested in annihilating the competition. I mean, there's a reason I like med ball slams at the gym. Although I don't throw them at people, to be clear. That's just anger management.
We'll have to verify that with somebody else from the gym.
If they can speak.
Right. Well, if they feel that they can speak freely. Maybe one of our witness protection episodes. Somebody from the gym comes on with a barbell.
No.
But so she drew a gender line. But more interesting to me was the idea that so many people, and it came as a surprise to her and to the game manufacturer, that so many people in all these trial plays would be interested in just seeing what could occur with the collaboration across the board, as opposed to playing for the objective, which was to win.
Right. That is fascinating. And I think that's one of the really cool things I've come to learn about game design is how much psychology and you can't ignore the psychology behind different kinds of games, whether, I've encountered some really, really funny ones, but interestingly, I've had several clients designing games. One just for her own team. It reminds me a tiny bit of what you're talking about. She designed this little game for one of their annual all team meeting kinds of things, where she wanted to raise, and so it's sort of what you're getting at here. She wanted to raise the issue to them of trade-offs, where if sales, or customer service wants this feature of a thing, but yet somebody else doesn't I'm sorry, I'm not saying that well.
You mean in their product, trade-offs in their product, or in their
just in business? Well, in general. So think of any company where there's a sales department, and then there's the people who actually have to deliver on that sales, whatever it is that the company sells. And it's very, very typical that there's a bit of a trade-off there of sales promising whatever it takes to get
tension between marketing and engineering.
Yes, because people will say what they need to say to sell it, and genuinely, it's not like a shell game or a bait and switch, but they're like, oh yeah, I'm sure we can do that. And then engineering's like, what? We can't do that. So she broke up this game where there was all these she had the actual teams write up these trade-offs of you could add this, but it's there always had to be a trade-off, plus 500 to sales, but negative 20 to engineering, because then they have to go make the thing or whatever. And then as you play the game, it was you did want your team to win, but the way she designed it was the whole point of it can't be at the expense of another team, that you actually have to advance your team, but advance the whole at the same time. And she did it in a very simplistic way. It was pretty cool. I was like, oh, we should somebody should make that game for teams to play with, because of that concept of yes, of course you need to advance the goals of your specific team. That is your goal, but you also have to always be advancing the overarching goal. Sometimes that means advancing another team's goals, because you need to help get them to a certain degree so that the whole company gets where it needs to go. So
I'm fascinated by the fact that she gamified it, because first of all, that takes a lot of thought and strategy. If you've ever tried to create a game that's engaging.
She did it shockingly quickly, and had very few problems with it. I mean, it was quite simplistic, but it was very effective. And the only thing that didn't work out was some of the numbers. She didn't anticipate, because she said you can assign values up to like 2,000 or something. And so one of the teams did like plus 2,000 minus 1,500, and the other team like did like plus 50 minus this, and so the numbers just didn't quite work out in the end. So that needed a little bit of calibration, but it was a really it was a really well done game.
But so that's the question. The question is, what gamifying is one of them, but what are the other strategies? What are the other ways that you can actually create a company culture? Because I think that's what it comes down to, realizing that your department can't win at the expense of other people in the company.
Well, and I'll add another client game design thing. I'm working with a newer person right now who actually designed a trivia game for multi-generations. It's called Gen Smack. It's just recently come out in production. And
so it's a real product. It wasn't.
It's a
like
real product. Yeah, no. It's a real product called Gen Smack. And no, I don't get any kickbacks on that, but I can get you a discount code probably. But but it's really cool. I bought one and it just arrived a couple of weeks ago. But it's really cool because there are categories for each generation. So there's like the traditionalist category, which is all the basic trivia stuff that comes out. And then there's like boomers, Gen X, Gen Z, millennials. And the cool thing about it is that means everybody can play and have fun. And you get a certain amount of points if you answer a question in your own generation. You get more points if you answer one outside of that generation. Right. And exactly the reason he designed it, and this comes back to the culture that you're talking about, I think, came up where we weren't actually playing the game, but especially in a family of folks with learning issues, where our number one, the one we all share, is an issue with recall. Remembering, like, being able to recall the specific name of a specific thing. I'll know what it is, and I'll be like, it's that guy who did the thing, and he also did this other thing, and he was like, I know it's in there, but I cannot regurgitate it. Therefore, Trivial Pursuit is like hell for us. Yeah, absolute uselessness. But we were playing around with the cards and just like drawing cards and asking them or whatever. And it was so fun for my daughter, because when we were doing the Gen Z, I wasn't even halfway through the card. She's like, oh, that's so-and-so. That's so-and-so. And I had no idea what they were. And she said the words, this is so fun. It's the first time I've ever actually been able to participate in a Trivial Pursuit kind of thing. And that's the reason he designed the game. But to your point, that also weaves into culture. Like, how do we make sure everyone can feel like a contributor, regardless of their years of life experience or years in this area? It reminds me a tiny bit of, at the architecture firm, we do these Friday happy hour pinup things, to like review a project. And I mean, I wasn't an architect at all, and I'd only been there a little bit, but they had a culture where if I said, well, that seems blah, 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 I wasn't immediately dismissed, because, my thought wasn't immediately dismissed just because, I hadn't trained as an architect. It was valued, or at least considered or addressed. I mean, usually I won't say usually I was wrong, whatever. That's not the point.
But no, I think that, and that's one of the reasons why the way we work with support staff has always been to explain everything about the case, as opposed to just stay in your lane and do this part. Because a lot of times the people who just don't happen to have Esquire after their name ask the questions that we need to consider. Yeah. Either from the client's perspective, or just, hey, here's a really good, if you get too deep in the weeds of your own technical expertise and forget the basic question that somebody's going to ask upon hearing this, in our case, this fact pattern or what have you. So more people that come in, particularly without the technical expertise of why we can't or why we should, and just ask the questions. I think that's incredibly valuable. One thing I will tell you in terms of playing, it was a Trivial Pursuit light game. And I remember when my kids were young, there was a question about Antietam or something like that. And so I answered the question, and Alex was like, well, of course you'd get it. I mean, it was the Civil War. I was like, what? What do you mean by that? It wasn't, that wasn't my generation. It's not like I was sitting around reading the papers going, what are the Rebs up to today?
That reminds me a tiny bit of when my son came home from school some year in elementary school, and he said, "Oh, the theme for the some dress up thing they were doing at school when they blend what I don't remember what it was." He's like, "The theme this year is ancient history, so like the Romans or the somethings or the late or the 80s."
Yeah.
I was like, ow, that really, oof. Wow, that was unnecessary. I want to go back though to something you said about, hats off to her to designing a game because it's really hard. I think when people think of gamification, they think of, I don't know, like winning awards, or I don't know. There's a very sort of like, I don't know the word for it, like silly or frivolous or something about gamification as like making it goofy or with confetti, or I don't know. I'm not saying it very well. I know what I mean.
Well, you get badges or something like
badges.
Productivity
exactly.
apps sometimes give
like
you badges and awards and levels and
Yes. And what I have learned in the past few years about game design is actually the real thought that goes into like the math behind a game is there's so much thought that then comes back, and it's to your original point of what motivates it. Because to gamify something just means that there are clear-cut rules. Like if you do this, then this happens, and then this is how you win. And it takes all the nuances and complications of life, and it boils it down to these very repeatable, understandable, navigatable rules of if then and what counts as a win and what counts as getting dinged. And the math behind that is it was just, it was one of those things like when somebody made the invisible visible to me and I saw the math behind it and how math then flows into motivation or lack of motivation, or why you would do a thing or why you would hold on that. And that's where I think the layer of how it affects company culture and whatnot really plays in, because we've talked about this a little bit before. You can so easily inadvertently incentivize the wrong behaviors by, we're going to give a bonus for this, like we're going to, when people work a ton of overtime, we're going to add to their bonus. Well, then people start just sticking around. So they're there, those kinds of like accidentally incentivizing the wrong things.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting when you talk about incentivizing the right things or incentivizing the wrong things, and more importantly, what you make visible. If you contrast a couple different games, if you contrast like Settlers of Catan, Settlers is very, it's a basic game. And what you see on the board are, settlements and cities and these little things that represent roads. And, so it's a great game in terms of winning and losing and strategy, but there's no other dimension to it. So for Wingspan, for example, the incentive to help everybody is to see how these habitats prosper. And they designed the game to be inherently beautiful, just the art and the way it works. So you get to admire how it's built. Whereas in Settlers, there's nothing to admire about how it's built. It's strategy, and we have a lot of fun playing it. But you don't look at the settlement and go, "That's a beautiful thing I created." And so what I think about when it comes down to business is if what you're making transparent is solely the balance sheet. We were at this level of revenue, and now we're at 10% above this level of revenue. That's great. And people can get excited if that 10% delta means that they get a bigger bonus and they can buy something or put it away or do whatever. But what I think made Wingspan so effective is that it showed enough of the beauty of what they're building. And I think in a lot of businesses, to connect with what we're actually building as opposed to just building a better balance sheet,
right.
is, I think, part of the answer of why it's important to us that everybody prospers and that our department doesn't win at the expense of their department, because you had a clear vision of what you're building more than profit.
Yeah. And just a quick side tangent that doesn't quite, it does sort of roll in. I was doing a session with a new client last week who was struggling with some just basic management kind of stuff, like how you it's a newer employee that this person is wanting to guide and not wanting to squelch that initial excitement, but also recognizing that there's some things they don't understand and worrying that some of the things that they wanted to correct them on were petty. And is that micromanaging? And it was something I said, well, keep in mind, micromanaging isn't judged by the size of the thing that you are weighing in on. It's whether that thing matters. So for instance, it was something as simple as the notes that you put in the CRM about the next thing. That is a very tiny thing, sizably speaking. I said, but I get the impression from what you're saying is that there's an art to it, that, if it's too basic, then somebody else can't be in that file and understand what's going on. Yeah. That being said, it doesn't mean that more is better, that transcribing the entire call you had isn't going to be helpful either. I said, I suspect there's an art of how you make a really effective note so that the team, she goes, oh, absolutely. I've never really thought about it, but there are probably some key things there. I said, and why does it matter? And she said, because, and then with this great passion, she talks about how they use those notes to make sure that the customer is getting what they need and that they're on the same page and they make them feel seen. And as she talked about it, I was like, wow. So if you put that context around it, it's no longer a petty, you're wanting to help that person understand how it fits into building this beautiful ecosystem-y kind of thing that really matters to the other people you work with as well as the customer. And so I love that piece of it.
Yeah, and I know this is going off down a road that's further away from the main story, but the part about the CRM note, though, that I've started to learn and that I've heard from people who speak on this topic is that one of the important things is to make sure you record the language of your best customer. What language do they use to reflect their frustrations or their visions or their passions or whatever it happens to be? And so that's where, if I summarize what's important to you, it's not nearly as impactful as if I quote how you express what's important to you. Because not only do I gain a greater understanding, but I know that anybody else in my company, if they read and really think about that note, they can speak your language in a way that resonates with you because it's literally your language.
Yeah. No, that's really important. I mean, I certainly know the value of that when I facilitate. When I write stuff on a board, I don't ever swap out words, even if I think there's a better word, because their words are so relevant to exactly what they're getting at. So I value that. I want to go back to another thing that I think was really important from the game design world that I think really fits into company culture, is that while talking to people who are working on designing or improving games, which until you brought this up, I didn't realize that there are 3. I was like, I didn't even realize this is the conversation I'm listening in on as much as I am. But one of the things I've heard come up with at least 2 of them is the importance of that the rules for a really good game or a really good company culture, that the rules not be arbitrary, that they make natural sense. So you don't just add a thing in to be to ding or to add bonus points, that as much as it can fit the narrative in a way that makes actual sense and not just a plus or a minus or something, that really makes it all the more effective. And I really think that's true in company culture, is when the rules just seem sort of not tied to something that really matters or a natural consequence of a thing. It's a bit like parenting too. natural consequences are so much better than, if you do that, then I take your phone away. I so much prefer you didn't do that, so therefore we aren't able to go do this other thing, because it's if then I think it lands the lesson way more than kind of arbitrary.
Right, but what that requires, though, is a full understanding of the if then. So it requires that level of transparency. It requires more than the balance sheet, but the understanding of the other person's language and what's important to them, and then the opportunity for them to see or not whether those things are reflected in the company of which they're a part. Those things are very complicated. We're talking about building a game being complicated, but in real life, being able to see the same things that you can see in a game that's successful means a level of transparency. It means alignment with priorities. It means a global view of what other people are seeing in terms of success or failure or frustration. I just find the whole thing fascinating, and it's just in the size of a board.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.